Alright, so this will be, I guess, actually video 4 of 3, but decided I'd separate the engine stuff into 2 because there's a lot going on top and bottom, and it might have been a long, kind of long video. Well, I'll start maybe with something on the outside here, just for reference. So you see this scoop I designed, runs under there, so air goes through there, through this ductwork here, which seals with this rubber seal on the heat exchanger here. So that's the intercooler heat exchanger. So air flows through, cools coolant that's flowing through that, flows through the intercooler here, which we'll talk about lower and lower bit. So this is basically the opposite. It is a heat exchanger as well, but it's cooling the air charge into the motor. You can see the water lines here, 1-inch water lines over to a big old pump right there. So it just circulates water through this. Have a little kind of burp tank here. No ice box or anything like that. It's not a race car. A lot of drag cars you'll see will have a pretty big container so they can put ice water and stuff like that to cool it down. But I could always do that. I've got the room, but it's not really what this car's for, so I figured it wasn't worth the hassle. So far the IAT has been pretty good. So the air pipes, down through there. You can see it's all sealed off. So in theory, the air comes out of there. If everything's working as it should, and it seems to work pretty good. IATs stay reasonable, although I haven't tracked the car or anything, but on the highway, doing pull after pull, it seems decent. We actually made 1200 wheel at like 150 degree intake temps, so obviously there's no air over the intercooler and sitting on the dyno. So I know it works pretty good, and the car is not susceptible to detonation, so I'm running E85 anyway. So pretty reliable so far on all that. What else we got? So there's the vent tank I talked about earlier on the bottom of the car where it vents down next to the exhaust. You don't see the little puffs of smoke. Just, I don't know, it's one of those things that always bothered me about race cars or high performance street cars that had, a little bit of blow by at idle. You'd see that. Better view of the window, carbon kind of trim around it. See out the back. Big stuff with the chassis here. You can see all this is tied into the shock tower. It's all welded. This is, it's not, that piece is not bolt in. You can see tubular goes over the gearbox down to the other side. So we have this, you can see the cross X brace here. So you never want bends in tubes. They're structural. I had to bend this tube. It's hard to see, but there you can kind of see the bend to go over the gearbox. So that was just unavoidable. Cause I got to tie the frame rail down here into the frame rail on the other side and force the gearbox in the way. So in order to make that as strong as a straight tube, I ran this brace from here to here. That's the peak of that bend. The bend is actually not centered because the diff is to the right, so that bend is actually, this curve is actually to the right side of the car. And then I've got this tube runs over to there, and so it braces that up real nice. Because the factory car, maybe I'll throw in a photo here, but the factory car, this is all actually interior space. This is like carpet and sheet metal and stuff, so I had to cut out all of that. And that's like, this is structural, so this is, the sheet metal in the original car, it was all structural, so I had to put it back together with these tubes. And you can see where I've X'd in the rest of the car here, and this brace is obviously removable. Although the motor and everything goes out of the bottom, you don't have to take the X brace off to get really to much of anything. But I felt, considering where it is, blocking stuff, what if I want to pull the intake off with the car, with the motor in the car or something, I'd make that removable. So it bolts to the shock tower here, and then bolts to this factory stiffener here. You can see it's square tube. That's part of the factory chassis. It's super stiff. So it goes, triangulates all that. So we got this nice box back here now. And then you can't really see, at least from here, if you go back to my old pictures on my Instagram, and I think even have some YouTube videos of this, but there's also a brace inside the firewall that runs from down the bottom on this side up to that point. So basically the opposite side of that bolt down there is tied in with a straight tube down over here. And there's a tube that runs through the chassis left to right across the bottom. So if you took all the sheet metal away, the car would actually still be pretty structural, which was the point. So it's super stiff. So far, all good. And then you got these guys. So inside this firewall, there's actually a roll hoop. So there's a roll cage 175 DOM that runs from over here on a little landing pad, bent, goes around the top of the window and back down, and it runs right where these guys tie in. So these bolt in, and they're semi-structural. I mean, the roll hoop is not really built to any racing standard. If you're going to race this car, you'd have to redo it all anyway. But ties into the top of the chassis here. Obviously, it's welded to this crossbar over here on landing plates. And then this is bolted to that with a pretty small bolt. I think it's 3/8 or something. It's nothing great. Better than nothing, obviously, to kind of triangulate up into that top piece. Obviously, in compression, it's super stiff because it's the firewall's pushing that way. In tension, You know, I mean, it's a 3/8 bolt. It's pretty stiff, but in a crash, you know, it wouldn't be that great. But I mean, it's way safer than even the factory car, because I've got a roll hoop in there. That's not even there in the factory car. There's no firewall. It's just open to the front to the back. So definitely way better it was than it was a factory. Not good enough to be, you know, say a track car, but you know, if it was a dedicated track car, put a full cage in the thing anyway. So I want to make sure it's super easy to work on. You can see, I mean, there's just tons of room. You know, I mean, I'm 6'2", so my hand is not small, and I can fit it in here no problem. Changed spark plugs in 10 minutes. We actually did it on the dyno. Gapped them down a little bit. Coolant reservoir there. Same thing on this side, pretty easy. You see the tops of the turbos. That's basically the turbo right there. And then right there, you can see the air filter. Air filter you can't really see from this side, but kind of ties you in from the last video where you saw the bottom view. Also, you can see there's a fan over here and a fan over there. That sucks cold air in from the outside. Obviously a ram air effect as well with the scoops. And that drives cool air right over the manifolds, which helps keep stuff in check. Runs air over the turbos. You know, thermal management is key for this stuff. As you saw from the bottom, I had heat blankets and thermal wrap on everything. And also those fans happen to blow nice cool air kind of where the air filters are as well. So it'd be better if the air filters were in some nice cold box extracting air straight from the outside, but it's about as good as you're gonna get. You see the back of the fan, that filter right below it right there. It's pretty close. So coolant catch tank, nothing too exciting. Runs it way back over to here. And there's a secondary catch. You can see that's like the overflow. If that thing, you know, if the car overheats or something, it blows coolant. I don't get it all over the rear tires, which you notice that's in front of the right rear tire. So it runs it down in here to the back of the car. It's a lot safer back there. Again, to make the motor easy to remove, hard line the top of the intake, fuel lines and all that. So I can just disconnect those two guys there real quick and easy, and the motor drops out the bottom. So it takes just a couple hours to pull the motor out. An hour and a half I'm rushing. Mainly just coolant and oil take the lines take the longest. Let's see what else going on up here. See the boost control valve kind of hidden in there a little bit. Everything's plumbed to be tight to the motor, so it's just easy to work on. I drop the motor, because again, I can pull the motor, gearbox, trans, turbos, the whole thing comes right out the bottom. You literally slide this coupler back and the whole motor can go down. So the intercooler and everything else you see here just stays. See what else got, you can see right here, I've kind of made little mounts for the intercooler pipes, kind of bracket on there to keep everything stable, but still flexible, because you need this stuff to move a little bit as the motor moves and vibrates around. You don't break stuff, otherwise you'll break stuff that's hard mounted like the intercooler. It's hard mounted. Yeah, so you can kind of see the one turbo feeds intercooler on this side, other turbo feeds intercooler on the other side, then feeds straight in the motor, pretty clean, kind of straight shot there. See one of the wastegates down in here, and it's a mirror image on the other side. You can see the heat shielding around it as well. These are water-cooled wastegates. You can see the water line running from the head over to the wastegate, and then it runs back into the coolant tank there. And on the back, you can size it. Yeah, you can see it really good actually. That line right there runs around the back, and is also feeds. So we've got, and it's hard to see this wastegate. There she is. So this wastegate, same kind of thing. You can see the heat shielding stuff, and then it's water-cooled as well. So pretty reliable. Should be able to hold, maintain high level boost for kind of extended period of time. And you can see the main umbilical for the engine. So every single wire for the engine goes through this one cord, or here, umbilical cord, or whatever you want to harness. And right behind this pretty little panel here is one big connector. So I can just unhook the entire engine with one connector. Again, drop it right out the bottom, easy. And that way, you know, I have to disconnect a bunch of stuff for break connectors, just a pain in the butt, right? So I can just do one connector, and then I just grab that connector and kind of lay it on top of the motor and drop the motor down. That's it. All the wiring, one fell swoop. Makes it pretty handy. What else? Some dry sump lines. Everything's managed pretty well. I got kind of clamps everywhere to make sure nothing moves around where it shouldn't. You can kind of see the E85 flex fuel sensor hiding under there. So it's got a bypass, so it only flows about half the fuel through it. That way it's not a restriction for the return line. Fuel pressure relayer hiding right here. I mean, the stuff looks pretty cool. It's kind of racy, all the cool AN fittings and everything, but I didn't want it super, like, just in your face. So I kind of tucked everything down. So there's the fuel pressure relayer kind of hiding under there, fuel pressure sensor, all that kind of good stuff. Anything else over here? Let's see, you know, gearbox, shift mechanism stuff. I did make, kind of hard to tell, but see how small that bolt is? It's kind of blurry. See how small that bolt is right there that goes through the whole shift linkage on. The reason it's so small is these are obviously hard, zoom back out here. Those are hardened rod ends, but if you do that, even though they're Teflon lined, you'll get a bunch of transmission noise into the car. And I already have some gear noise from the drop gear, so I actually have a rubber isolator. So the reason that bolt is so small and that it's about 5 millimeters, and then the spherical is actually 10. So I've got I machined a nylon guide and then a rubber bushing goes around that, so it isolates the noise. But it's still super crisp, like it's not sloppy at all, but gives you, good feel, but takes some of that road noise that the gearbox does otherwise transmit that could be obnoxious. Another little thing here you can see I had to do is, see this weld, I actually had to move the shock mount up 800 thousandths of an inch. That was to get the droop correct, because if you look at the way the car is, this custom body work, let me go to do this, be easier, yep. So, see, this actually goes past the centerline tire, wraps back around. Looks cool, but now as the car droops, tire wants to hit this. So I needed to take 800 thousandths of droop out of the car, and that was the best way to do it. That way I still am in the meat and the potatoes of the shock range. So if you just shim the shock, which you could do, take it apart and all that good stuff, you'd actually be using the kind of the high end of the shock. So this allows me to keep the good part of the shock in use and make it reliable. As basically I'm just using factory Ohlin shocks as they came. What else is going on good over here? Let's see. Stuff that you can see maybe from the top. From the bottom, you couldn't see the top. Remember I talked about those braces that run from an angle from the engine mount to the chassis. This is the other view of that one, and this one's even easier if I can get in here. See that guy right there? There you go. So that's the top mount, and notice the bottom's there as well for double shear. And that way, like I said before, they're angled downward, so if the car gets struck in the back, it actually drives the entire motor package downward, away from your back. And that's, whether it works or not, I hope I never find out, but in theory. And then I've got clutch switch I think I talked about during the interior shot. So this guy right here is clutch pressure, and then this loop goes through this valve and then to the clutch, and this solenoid allows the fluid to basically bypass. And so when it's in bypass mode, it drives like a regular car. But in launch mode, this solenoid's engaged, forces fluid through this valve, and this is a very, very small orifice valve. This is like a 20 turn valve. And then what that does is basically slips the clutch for you. So if I dump the clutch when it's in launch mode and that solenoid is activated, the fluid is forced through this tiny little orifice, and the clutch actually slowly releases. It slips like perfect every time. And that allows you to, really helps all-wheel drive cars or cars that have a lot of traction. It helps with driveline shock. So instead of, depending on how your foot's feeling and how hard you let the clutch out, it every time does it just right. It slips the clutch a tiny bit and makes it easier to launch the car, makes it more reliable, which is the most important part, obviously. Now you can do it with your foot, you're just never gonna be as consistent. And so it's really nice because you can kind of dial it in. If it slips too much, you just come back and adjust that knob, and vice versa. I've even thought about adding an electronic rotary knob or something on it, electrical stepper motor or something, so I could adjust them inside the car, but probably a bit overkill. I don't think I need to do that. I won't be messing with it that much, and it's not, like I said, it's not really a race car. It'd be cool if you're at the track and make it pass after pass, and I have to get out to play with it. I think that's about it. I talked about as fast as I can, so this video isn't drawn out too much. Couple of blow-off valves, pretty basic stuff, cool. One for each side. One had to look kind of cool, right? So I wanted some symmetry. I noticed the tubes, the silver tube on the left, that's the intake tube, and the one on the right, they match. It's exactly the same left to right. Wastegates are so tucked in, but it's hard to tell. These are symmetrical. This one and that one are actually mirror images of each other. Just little stuff like that, kind of cool, even though no one will ever notice it with me. Dry sump tank tucked in real low. I showed you the drain on the bottom of that guy, but it fits nice in there. Easy to change the oil, need to. I think that was about it. Last but not least, I've got a built-in bright ass light. It's got a 10-degree lens on it, so it lights up the motor real nice at night. Probably seen some of my Instagram pictures of that stuff. So anyway, that's it. I'm sure there'll be more. I know I'm working on, with a friend of mine, Ethan Glanger, some really awesome actually video of the car in action. So lots more to come. Stay tuned, subscribe, all that good stuff, so you can check out the next one.